Welcome, greetings and salutation to the golden option. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Salam, salam, salam. May peace and serenity rest, rule, and abide upon us all. Well, I think that we have a note of concern coming in once again. And the note says this: Mr. Man, where do the dead go after they die? The religions tell us that we either go to heaven, hell, or somewhere in between. Would you please explain this troubling subject to me? This is a very, very timely chronological question. I think that this particular question of concern relative to where does the dead go after they die is of universal concern. Have you ever considered asking yourselves this very, very profound, legitimate area of vital concern? Let me read this over again. May I? Thank you very much. Dankeschön. Merci beaucoup. It says here, Mr. Man, where do the dead go after they die? The religions tell us that we either go to heaven, hell, or somewhere in between. Would you please explain this troubling subject to me? No problem. Whoever wrote that question of concern in. Let me reiterate this troubling man's mind about where do the dead go after they die. Listen, people. If we do not understand to some significant measure of degree not only where do the dead go after they die, as it is expressed in the note of concern there, but are the dead? What is death? Where is mortality? I frankly am not convinced that many people, particularly the clergyhood, who speak on the subject of death, dying, burial, whatever you want to call it, do not really know what territory they are bargaining on. You see, there is only one orthotheocentricatorial death. There is only one real substantial death. Only one. And nobody, absolutely nobody, have died this death yet, except one person. Now let's face it, people. In the interim between the so-called living and the cemetery, there is one. Only one. Whoever died the true death, the pre-millennial state of the authenticatorial post-millennial death, was this man here. No one has ever died the death which the scriptures, that is the German Jehovah scripts, plainly tell us that there is no return from that death. And only one has ever died the true death. That is, the death that results from the penalty of the broken law which demands the life of the lawbreaker. I want you to think about that. All of those people that are in the sleeping chamber of the sarcophagus, the mausoleum, the coffin, the casket, the pyramid, the graveyard, all of them have not tasted this death. Think about it. Do you know what the word cemetery means? Cemetery? It literally means sleeping chamber. me hear you say cemetery equals sleeping chamber. Look in your dictionary. All of those that are in the cemeteries on the globe are sleeping. I call this state the unconscious hypnospiratorial sleep. That's what it is. When we expire, as they call it, that is not a death. No, one has simply expired into the sleeping chamber. That is an unconscious ex-hypno-spiralizationary state. I want you to think about this, people. This is so very, very important that we understand where does the living go after they die. And I say living, people, because you see, the German scripts has to be written in the figure of the matter of human speech so that you and myself could understand it on the level of our ignorance. Do we call this state of existence as we are experiencing living? No, we are not living. That's right. Do you call a temporal living living? Of course not. We can only find life in the one, the only one that has ever tasted true death. And out of the death which Yeshua HaMashiach died, and by the way, this death was a or should I say, a post-millennial death, made present in premillennial time. This is so very important. This man died a future death. And as I said, a post-millennial death. No one has ever died that death except him. And all apparent dying and death is not death at all. It is simply a, how could I say, a state of ex-hypnospiralization. That's all it is. Hypnos in Greek means sleep. Let me hear you say hypnos. Very good. If you want to say sleep in Greek language, you say hypnos. And of course, expire simply means the breath went out of the body. Ex means out of. Spire means breath. Okay? So, where does the dead go after they die? Notice, where does the dead go? Because you see, people, all of us are dead. That's right. We are all dead with a temporary, apparent, quasi-living existence. All of us. Remember, there was a statement in the New Testament that the Bethlehemian told his people relative to the dead. He said, let the dead bury the dead. So if the dead is given the responsibility to bury the dead, then that means only one has the life. And we must go to that one to get the life, or at least have that life expropriated to us, or accredited to us, or accounted to us by asking for that life. But outside of that, people, it's all dead. You think about it. And there are many words related to this phenomenon called death, the dying, the dead, and etc. And let me just share with you some of these terms, which actually is not mysterious at all. But we have terms like the anthropological interment. How many have heard of the interment? Very good. What is the interment? The mortal interment. It is the act of entering burial. To the sepulchre, inhumation, necessitate the last rites, or funeral rites. Sometimes it is called the extremed unction, the wake, the pyre, the funeral pile, cremation, immolation, the knell, passing bell, tolling, dirge, lamentations, because people are subject to lament the death of their loved ones. The death march, muffled drums, the elegy, the panegyric, funeral oration, the epitaph, the obituary. And let me stop on the obituary. Did you know that the Bible is the book called the Holy Obituary, or the O Holy Obituary? That's what it is. And most of the passages in the Bible are written around the mortuary text called the Book of the Dead. That's right. The Bible called the Book of the Dead, and etc. Then we have the death noticed, grave clothing, sometimes called the shroud, and the winding sheet, the cerement, coffin casket, the shell, the urn, the sarcophagus, the pall, the bier, the hearse, the catafalque, the grave, pit, tomb, vault, crypt, catacomb, Golgotha, house of death, narrow house, cemetery, necropolis. What is the necropolis? The necropolis is the city of the dead, the pulsating dead, the breathing dead. And this, in reality, people, in the context of totalistico-logical truth, is the truth and nothing else but the truth. And we must understand who we are before we can understand who we are not in the context of what is life relative to what is death. Think about it. So here we are, the pulsating dead teaching the pulsating dead. The pulsating dead listening to the pulsating dead. If we do not understand this as it is our privilege to understand it relative to who we are in comparison to the phenomenon called dying, death, and the like, we will never know what death is, and we will never see ourselves as the dead, the pulsating dead. Nevertheless, this man wants to know, where does one go after he dies? Well, I'm going to tell you, where does one go after they die? What if I told you that when one, let's say, ex-hypnospire, that he actually go to heaven? What if I told you that? That everybody in the cemetery is in heaven. What if I told you that? Would you believe it? Ah, you wouldn't believe it, huh? Well, I'm going to show you that there are three distinct heavens of which the German Jehovah's Scripts talks about. Let me hear you say, three heavens. Very good. Three heavens. In some traditions, the heavens are divided up into 7 heavens. But the German Jehovah's Scripts, as it refers to heavens, and you see, heavens is always spoken of in the plural vernacular of grammar, and particularly in Hebrew grammar. Did you know that? Oh, you didn't know that. Did you know when the Bible calls heaven, it speaks of it in the plural? How do you say heavens in Hebrew language? Does anybody know? You don't know? Well, let me share it with you. Heavens in Hebrew is always spoken of in the plural vernacular of Hebrew grammar. And you say shamayim. Shamayim. Let me hear you say Shamayim. Very good. Shall I write it on the board for you? All right. Let me write it on the board here for you. Sha. Shamayim. You see this im on the end? I am. In Hebrew, this is the designation, the grammatical designation for plurality. See? Im. Sha-ma-yim. Shamayim. Heavens, plural. That's right. In other words, you say heavens. Okay? I think you're beginning to get it now. It's just like when you say Elohim. Let me just write this down here for you. Elohim. See? That's for the Godhead. See the im on the end? Designates a triunity. Okay? So heavens in the Bible is always spoken of in the plural. I want you to think about that. So when I say, when the dead dies, because we're all dead people, and all of us are on death row, that's right. Every last one of us is on death row. Now we can get off of death row if we so chose. But I won't go into that aspect of the subject today. I said before that all that are in the graves, in the cemeteries, in the coffins, and etc., because that's what the whole globe is when we think of the planet. That's all it is. It's just a great revolving coffin, great revolving sarcophagus, pyramid. That's what it is. Waiting to take up her dead. This is so very important that we understand this. And that when I said that all of the dead, including the pulsating dead, that's us here, the dusty cemeteries personified in human flesh, waiting to ex-hypnospire, that's all, is in heaven. Now I said that the scripture speaks of heavens in the plural, didn't I? Yes. Shamayim. Genesis 1:1 in the Hebrew language says this. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. What is Shamayim? Shamayim is heavens. Oh, people, if you can understand this. There are myriads of heavens. That's right. But the unfortunate is that our heaven, which we call the atmospheric heaven, that's where we are, in the earth. Let me hear you say atmosphere. Good. Now let me hear you say atmospheric heaven. That's where we are. Now, after the entrance of what the Bible calls the blank sin hoax,